Today on the CBS Sports Spectacular, the Garmisch International Ski Jumping Tournament and the World's Professional Indoor Diving Championships. Brought to you by Vitalis with V7. Vitalis keeps your hair neat all day without grease. And by the Total Performance cars and trucks for 65. Ford, Fairlane, Falcon, Mustang, and Thunderbird. And by Mobil and more than 30,000 Mobil dealers from coast to coast.
This is Frank Lieber speaking to you from the world-famous Grossinger's Resort in upstate New York, right in the heart of the Catskill Mountains. And today, the CBS Sports Spectacular is proud to present the second annual World's Professional Indoor Diving Championships. We've got a great field, including competitors in 4 nations. And helping us call the action today, the diving coach at the University of Michigan and the fellow who pulled our divers through in such great style at the Olympics last fall. This is Dick Kimball. Dick, what do you look for today?
Well, I look for a tremendous meet. Actually, when I was in Tokyo, I saw the best Olympic divers, the amateur divers of the world. Now we're going to see the best world's professional divers. These divers that we're going to see today will do a different type of dives. They'll do some of the same type dives that you saw at the Olympics, but they'll also see some dives called spotters, where the diver does a back somersault back onto the board and then does his dive. This is quite a difficult maneuver, and it's not done in amateur diving. There's also a few other dives that aren't done in amateur diving we're going to see today, so it's going to be real interesting and thrilling to watch.
Dick, it looks like the divers are just about ready to go. In fact, there's the last practice dive right now. And in just a moment, we'll be set to go with the action.
There's John Candler now, the 2-time Olympian from London, England.
What's that wheel there?
Well, he's adjusting the fulcrum. That's to make the board have the right spring. He's practiced before time, and now he knows exactly where he wants that wheel set. It's quite important to each diver when they get up there.
For his first optional dive, a reverse 1.5 somersault with 1.5 twists. John Candler from London, 24 years old, member of the British Olympic diving team. Degree of difficulty in this dive, 2.6. Very nice. His score is 7, 7.5, and 2 8s. Very fine scoring. 10, of course, is the best you can do in this game.
That's right. Now we're going to get a chance to look at Eddie Cole doing exactly the same dive. This is one way the judges go about judging, is they compare one diver to the next. They also just look at the dive as a unit in itself and try and judge it.
Eddie's from Chicago, 28 years old, and a former collegiate diving list.
Eddie's standing there just thinking the dive through mentally, getting set to do it. Almost an identical dive to John Candler, out just a little bit further, but a very fine dive.
The scores on it, 7.5, 7.5, 7.5s across the board.
There's Joe Gerlach. He took a practice bounce. This is his first optional dive, and he's trying to get the board in the right place.
This looks like a tough one, Dick. 3.5 somersaults from the tuck position.
Yes, it is. Oh, that's a very difficult dive, and it's usually one of Joe's best dives, but as you saw, he was a little short.
6, 6.5, 7.5, and 6.5 for Joe Gerlach. Degree of difficulty was 2.9. Here's the same dive in slow motion.
Now you get a real good chance to take a look at how the arms come up overhead, and notice that his arms and head throw together. He grabs his legs and tucks up in a little ball and hangs on until he comes around and sees a 3.5 somersault. There you saw that he went short, just like he did in the meet, and it was a very costly dive for him. He's a great diver, and he pulled that dive short.
Al Coffey of Fort Lauderdale, Florida is next. He's 31 years old. An inward 2.5 somersault from the tuck position. Diving fans might not be familiar with that term tuck, or I should say non-diving fans.
Well, a tuck position is where the body bends at the hips and at the knees. You double up in a little ball, which makes you spin faster because you shorten your radius, and it increases your spin.
2.6 degree of difficulty on this one.
This is very difficult because you stand backwards and spin forward right by the board.
Let's watch it.
There you saw his stretch into the water. He lost his speed a little bit on the entry and fell short, which will cost him on his scores.
2 6s, a 6.5, and a 7 for Al Coffey. Our next competitor is Ron Munn. This is a spotter 2.5 somersault from the pike position.
As I mentioned before, it's very difficult to do that back somersault, come down on the board and get the right landing, and it's even more difficult to come out of the dive at the right time.
6.5, 5.5, 6.5, and 6.5. And winding up the first round, the oldest competitor in the meet, 34-year-old Joaquin Capilla from Mexico City. A double twisting 1.5 somersault from the pike position with a degree of difficulty of 2.4.
Joaquin is a great, great diver. He's won just about every title you can think of. He was Olympic diving champion, American diving champion, and you name it, he's been that champion.
Not bad.
Beautiful dive for Joaquin, a little bit loose on the entry, but a very nice dive.
And the scoring, 7.5, 7, 7.5, and 7.5. We'll be back with more professional diving in just a moment.
Hello.
I'm lonesome. Let's take a walk.
Okay. In a while.
To handle something like this all by yourself, you need confidence. And that's what Menon gives you, confidence. Take Menon push-button deodorant. This is the aerosol deodorant you can count on. How do you know? Because it was tested against the other leading aerosol by the toughest judges in the world. Men like you. They proved it. Menon push-button protects you better than the other leading aerosol. More confidence? Right. Menon Skin Bracer, the aftershave lotion that cools rather than burns. And Skin Bracer's enduring aroma has magnetic action. Actually draws women. Like a magnet. Menon Skin Bracer, Menon push-button deodorant. 2 good reasons why, wherever you find men, you'll find Menon.
The second of 3 optional dives from the low board coming up. This is John Candler, who leads following the first round.
John Candler is just finishing adjusting his fulcrum there. You'll notice that he used his fulcrum just a little bit further out on this dive because he's doing a back approach. He'll do this dive in a free position. We've talked about the tuck, pike, and layout positions, but the free position is where you can do either tuck, pike, or layout, or you may do some portion of the position during the dive.
A back 1.5 somersault with 2.5 twists. 2.7 degree of difficulty.
He starts this dive in a back somersault layout, and then you'll see the 2.5 twists come in, and he comes back to a pike position and for the entry.
Nice dive. John Candler from London, England, and the scoring. 8, 8, a 7, and an 8.5. Runner-up to Candler as we head into the second round of the optional dives is Eddie Cole. His next dive will be a back 1.5 somersault with 2.5 twists, 2.7 degree of difficulty.
Here we get a chance to see the same dive we just saw, so we get a chance to compare the two and find out whether or not we agree with the judges. Even though it's the same dive, you're going to see some style change. The twist may be done just a little bit differently, and also the toe point, the entry, and so forth are going to be a lot different.
Let's watch it closely. Nice job by Cole. The judges saw it this way: 8, 8.5, 8, and 8. So Candler and Cole running neck and neck. Same dive in slow motion.
Here you get a chance to really see what goes on. You see the 2.5 twists. Now he's coming back for his entry and stretch into the water. You see a great deal more wrong with the dive in slow motion than you do in regular motion.
Joe Gerlach, an inward 2.5 somersault from the tuck position. You gotta be very board conscious on this one, don't you?
Yes, you do, because you're standing there and spinning forward toward the board, watch very carefully on this dive because Joe Gerlach does this dive better than most every diver in the world. He's a tremendous cutaway spinner.
Ooh, he gets close to that board. Came out of it very nicely. 8, 8.5, a 9, the first one we've seen, and an 8.5. Let's look at it again in slow motion.
It is in slow motion. You see how close he passes to the board. He opens up, puts his hands overhead, and gets a very fine entry into the water, and consequently gets fine scores from the judges.
Al Coffey from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 31 years old. One of the top diving coaches in the nation. A forward 2.5 somersault from the pike position. Is there an ideal size for a diver?
Actually, you find that the divers will run rather small, but there are a few good big divers. There's that 2.5 pike with a good entry into the water. It's out just a little bit too far.
2.3 was the degree of difficulty. The scoring 7.5, 8.5, 8.5, and 8 for Al Coffey. Ron Munn, a spotter, 1.5 twisting double.
This is a trampoline trick. That's a very difficult dive to do on a springboard. You have to get your balance set and then do that tough optional dive.
And the scoring, 2 sevens, a 7.5, and a 7 for Ronnie Munn. Joaquin Campilla, as we wrap up the second round of the optional dives. This is a 3-meter board, by the way. How many feet would that be, Dick?
That's just about 10 feet, and it doesn't give you a whole lot of time to do the dive, but it gives you adequate space to do some of these very difficult optional dives.
A back 2.5 twisting, 1.5 somersault.
This dive here, Joaquin Campilla can do very well. He's an excellent twister. He always has been. Certainly one of the dives helped him win his Olympic championship. Beautiful dive by Joaquin. You notice the somersault save again underwater.
7.5, 8, 7.5, and 8.5. And now into the third round of the optional dives. John Candler, who is our leader thus far. Candler, the leader. Cole in second place. This is the final round from the low board. We'll have the high board competition coming up a bit later. A reverse 1.5 somersault with 2.5 twists, 2.9 degree of difficulty.
It's a whole lot of dive to try and get down on that 3-meter board. John's sort of a nervous competitor here. Very fine dive. He was a little loose coming off the board, but recovered very well and did a nice job on the entry.
A 6, a 7.5, a 7.5, and a 7.5.
I might point out that the judging, we eliminated the high and low score and kept the middle 2 scores in the competition and arrived at our score for the dive on that basis.
Eddie Cole, the competitor here.
That was a spotter into a double twisting forward 1.5 somersault. That's a beautiful dive for Eddie. That puts him right up there close in the contest.
6.5, 7.5, 8, and 7.5. Still Cole and Candler as far as the standings go. Joe Gerlach is up next. From Jacksonville, Florida, former member of the Hungarian Olympic diving team. A reverse 1.5 somersault with 1.5 twists, 2.6 degree of difficulty.
A little too early on his twist. Didn't quite get his legs up and fell a little bit short. Still a pretty good dive for Joe.
6, 7, 7.5, and 7.5. The key to winning here is consistency, isn't it, Dick?
It certainly is. I might point out that the divers have done, this is their 6th dive. They did 3 required dives, and now they're doing their 3 optionals, which we've seen, so that the placement of the contest is based on 6 dives, not only the 3 dives that we've seen.
Al Coffey, front 1.5 somersault with a double twist, 2.4 degree of difficulty.
Al Coffey does this in the old style, meaning he comes around the corner coming out rather than squaring. But he still does a real nice job with it and gets an excellent entry, and that's a good dive for Al.
The score saw it this way: 7.5, 7.5, 7.5, and 7.5 across the board. Ronnie Munn, from Augusta, Georgia, in the Army station there. Back 2.5 twisting, 1.5 somersault.
Yes, Ronnie Munn was a 3-time national champion on trampoline, and he's an excellent twister, although he twists pretty much trampoline style.
Pretty good job.
Yes, it was. Came around the corner a little bit. This is primarily due to the fact that he does a lot of trampoline twisting.
7.5, 7, 8, and 7.5 for Ronnie Munn. And we wind up the low board competition with Joaquin Capilla. A spotter, 2.5 somersault. Degree of difficulty, 2.7.
You'll notice on the spotter here, this is a dive where you come back onto the board and then do your dive from there. It's very important to get in the right position. If you're leaning over the board a little bit too much, it could throw you way in the middle of the pool, or if you're back, it could put you too close. And Joaquin stepped over the board a little too much, pushed out, which will cost him some points. It was a nice dive, but much too far out in the middle of the pool. 6.5, 6, 7.5, and 6.5. And now let's go to Frank Grieber and take a look at the scores thus far.
Let's take a look at the standings at the end of the low board competition. As you can see, it's become a very tight race between John Candler of London, England, who holds 0.3 of a point edge at this moment over Eddie Cole of Chicago. You might be interested in knowing exactly how we compile these scores. It's very simple. The judge gives an average score, say it's 7, at the end of each dive. That score is then multiplied by the degree of difficulty. If it were 2, you'd have a score of 14 for that round. Then the 6 rounds are added together, and we got our total figure. But the fellows to watch in the high board competition appear to be John Candler and Eddie Cole. We'll be set to go with the high board competition from Grossinger's in just a moment.
You're looking at the 5-meter board now, about 16 feet off the water. Dick, what are the differences in working off this board?
Big difference is the fact that extra 5 feet or more over the 3-meter board makes a lot of difference. You have a little extra time to do your dives. There's a greater chance of going over on some of your dives. You're also able to do some more difficult dives because of the extra room.
John Candler, our leader, inward 2.5 somersault from the tuck position. His first optional dive of the day.
This ought to be interesting because John Candler has never dived at this particular level. He's been primarily diving at 3-meter, and this is his first crack at these optionals up there.
2.6 degree of difficulty on this one.
Had an excellent top there, but he came out a little bit too late and washed over on the entry. It just may cost him a little bit on this dive. We'll see.
7, 6, 6.5, and 6.5. This means that Eddie Cole, who is up next, could conceivably take over the lead with a good dive here.
That's for sure, Joe. Eddie Cole has been diving very well all along, and if he maintains his consistency here, he has a good chance of taking the lead for the first time since early in the contest.
Eddie with a back 1.5 somersault with 2.5 twists. 2.7 degree of difficulty.
This is a good dive for Eddie, too. He twists very well. And if he hits this dive, I expect Eddie will go into the lead by just a little bit.
Great job by Eddie Cole, and that may very well do it.
Let's see what he does on these scores here.
8.5, 8, 8.5, and 8. And Eddie Cole has taken over the leadership from John Candler. Here's the same dive in slow motion.
Here you see that terrific jump off the board, a nice twist. He comes around, he squares. That's the part where you throw the arms out and pike, and then his entry into the water, which was very fine, and put him in the lead for the first time.
Joe Gerlach with an inward 2.5 somersault. Joe had an accident off the low board in the morning, which might have cost him. He nicked a heel on the edge of the board. As he was going down, came up with a very low score, and that has kept him from being up among the leaders. It's his right heel, and there's a good look at it. You can see how it was bruised. Here's how it happened earlier in the day. Watch as his heel flicks that board.
This is a back dive tuck. He did this in the required dives. He comes a little close, ticks his heel, and his feet go apart. It knocks him over, and his scores were low, and knocked him down in the contest, and since then he's been trying to come on strong on his optionals to bring him back up in the contest.
Here's a 2.5 inward somersault, 2.6 degree of difficulty.
Joe did this dive very well on the 3-meter board, and he can do it well up here. And boy, he did too, and that score there just brought him right back up in a contest. He still may have a chance to win this if he keeps coming on strong like this.
8, 8.5, 8.5, and 8.5 for Joe Gerlach. Al Coffey is next. His first optional dive off the high board, a back dive with 1.5 twists, and then a front 2.5 somersault from the tuck position. Degree of difficulty, 2.6.
Al Coffey has been coming on strong all along, just as Joe Gerlach has in this high diving here. Al Coffey still stands a chance of winning this contest. With John Candler missing that dive, it puts him back, and now the contest is a 4-way contest between Coffey, Cole, Candler, and Gerlach.
Nice job by Al Coffey, and the scoring should bear that out. An 8, another 8. 3 8s and a 7.5 for Al Coffey. Ron Munn with a front double somersault with 1.5 twists from the pike position.
Ron Munn here does another trampoline trick. We call this a fliffus on the trampoline. It's a pretty dive, but rather difficult to control on the 5-meter board. He did that in the open pike position, which means the arms stay out at the sides. He did a good job on the dive, got a pretty nice entry. We'll see what he did for scores.
8, 7, 7.5, and 7.5. And winding up this first round of optional dives from the high board, Joaquin Capilla. A triple jackknife. Those of you at home who have trouble doing perhaps one jackknife will enjoy this one. 2.7 degree of difficulty.
This is a very tricky dive. It sounds rather simple, but boy, to touch 3 times and get in is difficult.
Very nice. Joaquin Capilla from Mexico City comes up with a 7.5, a 7, a 7.5, and a 7.5. Let's look at it in slow motion. What do the judges look for here?
Well, the judges are going to be looking for height off the board, execution, and the entry into the water. Now here he jumps up, he touches the first time. You notice his feet slip a little bit, he touches twice, and then again, and into the water. He lost his legs a little bit, and that's the reason why he didn't get 8.5s and 9s in the dive.
At the end of the first round from the high board of the optional dives, a new leader, Eddie Cole, as we go back to John Candler and his second of 3 optional dives, a forward 3.5 somersault from the tuck position. What do you think about when you're up there? You've been there, Dick.
Well, you're thinking about your dive primarily. You're trying to concentrate on what you're going to do, and you're thinking about trying to pick your score up if you know where you are in the contest. John knows that he missed a dive last time. He has to hit this dive to keep himself in the running, and that's what he's worrying about, is trying to hit this difficult dive.
Here's the scoring on it. 7, a 5.5, a 6.5, and a 6.5. Not too well for a fellow who's trailing.
That's right. John held on a little too long, opened up late, and arched over on the finish. It cost him some good points on the dive. Actually, the difficulty on that dive was 2.9. The most difficult dive that any diver does in this contest is a 3.0 difficulty. We, for any difficulty that wasn't listed in the book, we had to make up the difficulty by sitting down with the divers and deciding on the particular difficulty of the dive.
This is the leader up till now, Eddie Cole. A reverse 1.5 somersault with 2.5 twists, 2.9 degree of difficulty. Another nice job by Cole. His consistency is the big thing about him, no doubt about it.
Right, the dive could have been a little better, but it was a beautiful dive.
7.5, 8, 7.5, and 7.5.
Here it is in slow motion. You get a chance to see why the judges gave him the particular scores they did. You see that he lost his legs a little bit on the takeoff. Then he recovers very well, comes around, and puts the dive in pretty well on the entry. Now this is what kept Eddie Cole in the contest, is this consistent type diving. He didn't miss a dive. ever in the contest, which has kept him up there in first place.
Joe Gerlach with a split 2.5 somersault from the pike position. Degree of difficulty 2.7. Joe coming on strong, as we mentioned, in this round from the high board.
Joe's going to have to do some very fine diving on these last two dives, but he could bring himself back up into first place. He does a good split 2.5, and his last dive is also a good one for him. That's sort of a 2.5 of hiccups. He opens up in the middle of it, and then comes back out and tucks up again and goes in head first.
8s across the board for Joe Gerlach. We've been talking about this degree of difficulty. Who determines the degree of difficulty, Dick?
Actually, we sit down together. We have a panel of coaches and officials in the NCAA or AAU, and we decide on the difficulty purely on the basis of having done our dives ourselves, and we know how difficult they are, and it's sort of an arbitrary thing.
This is a tough one. Al Coffey, a reverse dive, 1.5 twists, 2.5 somersaults from the tuck position.
This dive is going to have to be very good for Al if he's going to bring himself up into first place.
Beautiful entry into the water.
There's the nicest dive Al's done all day. Beautiful dive.
Close to a perfect dive as we've seen. 8.5, 9, 9.5, and 8 for Al Coffey, who's right back into the thick of the competition. He's pretty happy about it, quite needless to say.
And here's that same dive in slow motion. He's in that tuck position. Notice a beautiful toe point Al Coffey has. One of the best toe points in diving. And there's that nice stretch on the entry and a soft entry. One of the things that the judges look at when they see a diver go in, that's the last thing they see is that entry.
Ronnie Munn with a front 2.5 somersault from the pike position, 2.3 degree of difficulty. Munn, formerly from Amarillo, Texas, spent some time in South Africa. He won that country's national diving title at one time.
Here's the 2.5 pike. Oh, he got a little bit over on that one, and here he's clawing around a little bit because he did miss the dive. He knew he missed the dive. That's the way it goes in diving. You know when you've gone over or gone short, and you can tell what you've done.
5.5, 5, 5, and 6 for Ronnie Munn, which puts him down the list. Joaquin Capilla. As we come to the end of the second round of the optional dives from the 5-meter board, a double twisting 1.5 somersault. Degree of difficulty on this one is 2.4.
Joaquin Capilla, I might add, was on 3 Olympic teams for Mexico. Beautiful dive, Joaquin.
His scoring: 7.5, 7, 6.5, and 7.5. The final dives in 1 minute. Now the final dives by each competitor. 4 of the 6 men still in the running. Eddie Cole in first place, Gerlach is second, Coffey third, and Candler is fourth. And this is John Candler of London, the first diver in this final round. He's had a little trouble from the high board, Dick.
Yes, he has. He's not used to this particular level yet. It's a little bit too high for him. He's gone over on all of his dives, and let's see how he makes out on this one.
Pretty good, but
yes,
not good enough.
There again, you see that he washed over a little bit on the entry, just a little bit too much.
7, 6.5, a 7, and a 7.5. That was a reverse 1.5 somersault with 2.5 twists. Here's our leader, Eddie Cole, and he can just about wrap it up here with a good dive. So he is undoubtedly thinking that there is a Ford Mustang in his future right now, because that is the top prize in this competition.
He's thinking right now of doing that spotter he has to do, and then afterward he does a double twisting 1.5 somersault. This is a tough dive to do, even if you don't have a car riding on the results.
This could mean the championship. It's a good one.
That just could wrap it up for Eddie Cole. Joe Gerlach still has an excellent chance, but he'd have to have almost a perfect score to do it.
Boy, is he happy. 8, 7.5, and 2 8s for Eddie Cole, accepting congratulations. So it would require just about a perfect dive by Gerlach. Here's the same dive in slow motion.
There's that spotter. He comes back on the board. He pushes up into the dive. You see his arms come across for the twist. He comes around. He's trying to spot that water and get ready for the entry. And he gets in the water real well, which puts him in good position for winning this contest.
That lack of splash still is a big thing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Although there are more factors in judging diving, we judge the board work, the execution, and also the entry. It comes right down to that entry when you get judging. That's the last thing they see.
This is Joe Gerlach. He needs almost a perfect dive to take this championship away from Eddie Cole. A front 3.5 somersault from the tuck position. Looks good.
Boy, that was a beautiful dive by Joe Gerlach. He's an excellent competitor. He knew what he had to do. He went after it to try and hit the dive for 10s.
8.5, 9, 9, 8.5. We'll look at it again. What could he have done to improve that dive? It looked almost perfect.
It was almost perfect. He had a few things wrong with it. On the takeoff, he had a good jump, but he spreads his legs a little bit in the spin. His legs are apart as he comes around, and as he kicks, notice he loses his feet a little bit and opens up just a little bit early, and then sort of rolls a hair over on the finish. This is what cost him 10s in that dive.
That moves him to second place behind Cole. Here is Al Coffey, the only other man with a chance to win this championship.
He executed that same forward 3.5 that Joe Gerlach did, but he was a little stuck, wasn't spinning fast enough, opened up early and fell short.
2 7s, a 7.5, and another 7.5. Ron Munn. His final dive, the 71st in this competition. Munn is out of the running.
That was a split double. Ronnie Munn, I might add, is a former Pan American trampoline champion.
There's his scoring, 6.5, 7, 6, and 7. And the 72nd and final dive in the World Indoor Competition from Grossinger's coming up. Joaquin Capilla with a back 2.5 twisting, 1.5 somersault, 2.7 degree of difficulty.
Joaquin this afternoon has been hot and cold, and this is what's kept him down in the running. He hasn't been able to get up there in first place all through the afternoon. Beautiful dive by Joaquin. I know Joaquin's real happy with that one. Let's look at what he gets for scores. 8, 8, 8.5, 7.5. And now let's go back to Frank and take a look at the official results.
And this is the way it ended. Eddie Cole of Chicago, our winner. Joe Gerlach finished in second place. Al Coffey wound up third in the World Professional Indoor Diving Championships here at Grossinger's. We put a lot of figures on this board today, but really when you get down to it, there's only one that matters. Eddie Cole's score, a fine performance, 224.52. He is our new world champion. We'll be back to chat with him right after this message. Now meet the new world's professional indoor diving champion, Eddie Cole from Chicago, Illinois. Eddie, you were trailing following the low board competition, but you came on strong. Much pressure toward the end.
Well, there was pressure throughout the contest, Frank, because it was very, very close right up to the end.
Your winning was very worthwhile because you have won the new 1965 Ford Mustang 2+2 Fastback. Look at that styling. Pretty exciting, I'd say. In fact, there's excitement all the way through this car, beginning with the new standard 200 cubic inch engine. The new Ford Mustang 2+2. Terrific prize for a great job. We hope that you enjoy it.
Well, thank you, Frank. It's really a beauty, and I'm sure I'll get miles of pleasure out of it.
We'd like to thank Dick Kimball, the diving coach at the University of Michigan, for his assistance on our broadcast today. And now this is Frank Lieber saying so long from Grossinger's.
Spectacular was brought to you by L&M, rich flavor through a filter. L&M, the cigarette you can taste. And by Menin Skin Bracer, it cools rather than burns. And by the Total Performance cars and trucks for 65, Ford, Fairlane, Falcon, Mustang, and Thunderbird. The CBS Sports Spectacular was produced by CBS Television Sports. The preceding program was pre-recorded.